We've got to stop sleeping on these Companion Chronicle box sets, folks. Like, this is like peak Doctor Who. Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mr. TARDIS, and you know me, I'm a big fan of the First Doctor. I also really like the First Doctor in the world of Big Finish Productions. However, the full cast audio dramas starring Stephen Noonan and Lauren Cornelius, they only release one a year. How am I meant to get my fix? How am I meant to love the world of the First Doctor in Big Finish if I only get one helping a year? Well, thankfully, we've got a new installment in the Companion Chronicles series. This one is called Families. For those of you who don't know, the Companion Chronicles range is, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's Doctor Who stories in the world of audio told through the eyes of the companions and often narrated by the companion actors. Carol Ann Ford, Fraser Hines, Lalla Ward, Peter Purves, Maureen O'Brien. And a couple of years ago, I reviewed the Companion Chronicles The Second Doctor Volume 3, and I think this wound up in like my top 10 for the year. This was a really strong box set, and now a few years later, we've got another box set of Companion Chronicles. This one is called Families. Don't let the title, give you too many ideas, because it's a very tenuous connection in terms of the themes of families, in my opinion at least. But that doesn't stop this box set from giving us 4 really strong stories. We've got The Temple of Light by Jonathan Morris. This is a story narrated by Maureen O'Brien. We've got Stardust and Ashes by Ian Potter, narrated by Carol Ann Ford. The White Ship by Paul Morris, narrated by Peter Purves. And The Y Factor by Christopher Cooper, narrated by Lauren Cornelius. Oh yeah, and Lauren Cornelius, who's the voice of Dodo for the First Doctor Adventures for Big Finish. This is Lauren Cornelius's introduction to the Companion Chronicles range. And also Stephen Noonan is one of the few other actors to join the box set, but only in the second half. For the first 2 stories, we've got Duncan Wisby, who voices like 15 characters in these 2 box sets. It's kind of impressive. Also, this box set is produced by the Purple Doctor himself, friend of the channel, Dominic G. Martin. I was hoping to scroll down to find a picture of him, but instead I found this really fun picture of Peter Purves and Stephen Noonan as if they just saw you across the bar and really like your vibe. Okay, so firstly we've got The Temple of Light, which is a story which sees Vicky travelling in the TARDIS with the First Doctor, Ian and Barbara. However, some outside force causes the TARDIS to freeze up, and Vicky is flung into some strange unknown civilization where everything appears to be much bigger. She finds a primitive society who worship a Temple of Light but also want to do a ritual to sacrifice her in order to stop their world from falling apart. Vicky meets a young man called Nebron who wants to save his grandfather from this ritual, and it's essentially a story where Vicky and Nebron have to make their way across this strange landscape, this strange shrunken landscape, in order to find the Temple of Darkness to free Vicky and everyone else from this strange new world.
In.
What are you going to do with me?
Don't worry. The ritual takes place every 25 hours. You won't have long to wait.
Rather, you just told me now.
Only the priest lords know of its mysteries. I'm just a monk guard.
Hang on. It takes place every 25 hours, but you told Nebron his grandfather would have another month.
But he will. A day in the temple is a month in the city.
What? I don't understand.
The closer you get to the source, the slower time passes. Now, get some rest. I'll be back before you know it.
The slower time passes. Some sort of time dilation effect, I suppose. If only the doctor was here. He'd be able to explain. And Barbara and Ian, they'd know what to do, not be so stupid as to get locked up in the first place.
Unfortunately, I can't dive too deeply into the Temple of Light because there's some really great twists and turns in this hour-long adventure. I thought that this was such a strong opener, and it does feel like one of those strange side stories that Doctor Who would do, similar to stories like The Mind Robber, The Edge of Destruction, and Planet of Giants, while also throwing in some elements of The Twilight Zone, specifically the episode The Little People, which The Simpsons adapted in Treehouse of Horror in the Genesis tub. That's probably how you folks will know that story. The stakes feel really high as it's just Vicky on her own. There's no Doctor, there's no Ian or Barbara to help or rescue her. And while I won't give away the actual big endgame twist, it's pretty clear early on that Vicky is shrunk inside a giant computer, or rather it's a normal sized computer, she is just small. And the way that the story and the abstract concepts sort of just branch out from there, is really fascinating. There's like interstellar aspects with the time dilation that takes place in this mini civilization, and how the time dilation messes up the civilization's family tree, the monks that are there who worship these idols. You've got this head guard character called Herdo who is just so persistent, and while Maureen O'Brien's narration and voice acting is terrific here, I think the MVP for the first half of this box set more broadly is Duncan Wisby, who voices numerous characters, sometimes in the same scene, and I was like waiting for the credits to start in the end of the first story and thinking, okay, who played all of these characters? And then it just turns out it's one guy. Incredibly impressive stuff, but The Temple of Light was a really enthralling listen. I adored this story from beginning to end. It's a great Vicky story, of course, but you know, it does feel like if you're a fan of stories like The Edge of Destruction, then this is like an escalation of that, more experimental. I can almost like imagine the black and white cinematography and the sets being built if they were to make this in the 60s, directed by Douglas Camfield or something. I thought that this was such a faithful look at those sort of like side stories, and Jonathan Morris has done a terrific job with the characterization and the themes and the world building. I think that this is one of Jonathan Morris's best scripts in ages. This was really, really good. So how on earth do you follow that? Well, you follow it up with Stardust and Ashes by Ian Potter. This story's framing device is that Susan Campbell, as in this is a sequel to the Daleks' invasion of Earth, and this story is also a sequel to the Big Finish stories After the Daleks and To the Death. So Susan is alone, she has no husband, she has no grandfather, she has no child. She's sat next to a fire pondering everything, and then a stranger comes to join her, and then she tells this story to the stranger, telling a story of when she's travelling with the First Doctor and Ian and Barbara, and in the TARDIS they answer a distress signal from a ship called the Meta Incognita, and they land on the ship, but it appears to be entirely deserted, and the only entity there is the computer who they're talking to via voice, called Qualia, and it becomes essentially a cat and mouse game between the Doctor, Ian, Barbara and Susan and Qualia as they try and figure out what Qualia's deal is. And once again, this feels like a really faithful story that they could have done in the 1960s, especially with like the repeating corridors, which, you know, that feels like a really fun throwback. It's basically the opening part to the Sensorites and the opening part to the Keys of Marinus, but across 2 episodes and with a fully fleshed out antagonist. But it's a really strong 2-part story with a great ending cliffhanger to part 1, which sort of lays bare what is going on this ship.
We've come to help. What's the nature of your emergency? Asked Ian.
Please state level of clearance and ID code class.
I regret we have no documentation you would recognize, sir. But I can assure you we mean you no harm.
Assurance insufficient.
Barbara turned to grandfather. This voice, it's not human, is it, Doctor? We're talking to a machine, aren't we? That was it, I thought. That's what had troubled me in Qualia's measured tones. Sir, who, pray, am I addressing?
This is the Qualia system.
The ship computer.
Qualia is the ship's neural control net.
Who can we speak to in charge?
You may speak to Qualia.
Conceited blighter, isn't it? Ian muttered, then raised his voice. Look, we just want to help your crew.
Assistance cannot be authorized.
Well, can you at least pass on a message? Tell the crew help's on the way.
The message is being relayed.
And?
Response awaited.
I will say, though, I was getting slight flashbacks to the 10th Doctor Chronicles box set from 2023, specifically the Opacity Factor by Carl Rowans, which sees the 10th Doctor trying to deal with a security system on this Moon Center base. It's this really effective look at artificial intelligence, and Stardust and Ashes is dealing with similar themes. I think the Opacity Factor is a more interesting story, however, that is because it has a bigger supporting cast, whereas for this one, for Stardust and Ashes, it is just the Doctor and companions versus the computer. The story itself has great twists and turns, as well as this idea of how much does the computer actually know and how much control is the computer in? Is it using these loopholes to sort of navigate around its programming that it just can't break? It's also a rare Doctor Who story that features 4 characters, you know, the Doctor, Susan, Ian and Barbara, that utilizes all 4 of them and their specific skill sets and their specific knowledge bases really strongly. But while the main A-plot on Meta Incognita is really effective, the ending itself and the main framing device with Susan around the campfire talking to this stranger, That's so heartbreaking. Like the closing minutes of this story, oh my god, I was driving while listening to this story and I was like, oh god, I can't drive because I've got tears in my eyes. Carol Ann Ford is so brilliant in this story, not only narrating and voicing all of the characters, but just really laying bare the heartbreak of this character who's been left behind by all of her family and what she's trying to do to heal and come to terms with that. It's so effective. And this takes us now into the second half of the box set. We have The White Ship by Paul Morris. It's set in 1120 on the 25th of November, and if you know your history, it's the day that the White Ship sank. This is narrated by Peter Purves. The First Doctor and Stephen Taylor arrive in Normandy. Henry I is preparing to set sail for England, but Stephen is mistaken for one of his relatives and winds up separated from the Doctor in pursuit of the TARDIS, which is brought on board the White Ship with the royal cargo.
Fitzstephen whispered back that the younger man was the king's nephew, Stephen of Blois, and quite a popinjay by reputation. At last, the advisers stepped aside. Henry rubbed his chin thoughtfully. His council had been unable to agree. Was anyone willing to provide an impartial opinion? Perhaps the learned-looking gentleman with the flowing white hair. The Doctor's eyes glinted. Someone had asked him for his opinion, and he never needed asking twice.
The ship on offer is fast, but you have no need of speed. Your plans are set. Security and comfort are the priority. On the other hand, it would be a waste to decline this handsome offer outright. The solution, then, is to match each ship to its best-fitted cargo.
I really want to like The White Ship. However, I felt that the story itself is really starting to bump up against the limitations of the Companion Chronicles format. It's a story with a huge cast of characters, all of them voiced by Stephen Noonan apart from Stephen Taylor. But it's a story that's about deception, it's about assuming identities, it's about this huge group of people on this ship. And I just thought it was very difficult to convey that with just 2 actors and through mostly prose. I don't think that The White Ship really succeeds in that, unfortunately. There's just too many characters to keep track of, there's not enough voices, meaning that for part 1 of The White Ship, I found it very hard to follow. But then, for part 2 of The White Ship, when it's just Stephen and the crew on the boat for the most part, and it becomes a disaster tragedy story, that's where I thought this story really found its footing. This really effective story where Stephen is mistaken for royalty, so that when everything does start unfolding on the White Ship and tragedy does strike, he's like one of the first ones out of there by force, and the amount of guilt he feels about that, and how his instincts as a hero are really trying to kick in, but all of these external factors are stopping him from doing it. And I thought it was a really effective Stephen Taylor story. It just takes a while to get there, and by a while I'm talking like 40 minutes. And I thought that the final few scenes were just really somber. This is just another tragedy in a long list of tragedies that Stephen Taylor is witness to that almost pushes Stephen away permanently from the Doctor at the end of the massacre. You know, Stephen sees the fall of Troy, he sees everything that happens in the Daleks' master plan, all of these incredibly depressing things that happen to Stephen over the course of his adventures alone with the First Doctor, culminating in that brilliant ending scene of the massacre. And this feels like another arrow in the quiver of that incredibly tragic arc, meaning that, much like the other stories in this box set, it's a very well-placed First Doctor story. I love how all of these stories conceptually are really faithful to the themes of all of the characters and feel like they could just slot into the TV series itself. And that includes The Y Factor by Christopher Cooper. This is a story narrated by Lauren Cornelius, who plays Dodo. Dodo and the First Doctor, they land in 1947 London. Dodo is out running a group of thugs who she's been chased by, and she's rescued by this old woman called Edith. And Edith, despite being a woman in her 70s, is able to kick the crap out of these thugs. And we later learn that this isn't just your standard ass-kicking granny. This was Edith Garrod, a suffragist who taught many of the women in the suffrage movement self-defense and how to fight back against the police, quite literally. And what follows is a story where the First Doctor, Edith, and Dodo have to stop a conspiracy rising in the heart of post-war London, which sees the Nazis trying to make a surprise return.
We stop by a window that looks down into the main yard, where 2 workers are pushing a trolley. Edith murmurs, "A male workforce, of course. Is that so unusual in this day and age?" Edith sounds let down as she tells me that sadly, it's something the war didn't change. All the work we took on in places like this while the men were facing down Hitler's guns, only to be banished back to domestic servitude the moment the war was over. She adds, sometimes it feels as if the movement didn't go far enough. Things do get better. I mean, I'm sure they will, given time. Edith shakes her head and says it took more than a century to win suffrage. She wonders how long will it take to achieve genuine equality.
We're essentially dealing with remembrance of the Daleks territory, where after World War II you still have these fringes of Nazi sympathisers still trying to mobilise themselves in London. I thought that the Y Factor was a really interesting story. I really liked what they did with the Doctor in part 1, where because he gets infected by this mysterious alien fungus, he spends most of part 1 thinking he's about to regenerate. And he starts flitting through all of these different personalities with these different catchphrases, kind of similar to what the Fifth Doctor did at the start of Castrovalva, where he's naming companions and catchphrases from his predecessors, but here it's the First Doctor going forward, craving jelly babies, doing Venusian Aikido. And you can tell that Stephen Noonan is having a lot of fun with this regenerative trauma, but it's also sowing the seeds for the main threat of the story, which is this alien fungus, which has a very novel twist to it, which involves the human chromosomes. And the reason it has that effect on the Doctor is because, and I'm quoting here, the Doctor has an alphabet of chromosomes. Well, Christopher Cooper has penned a fiercely feminist story that gives Dodo an awful lot to do and a lot of opportunities to stand out, and it's just great to hear Lauren Cornelius really enjoying and reveling in this role. I wish that Lauren Cornelius had more to do in the main First Doctor range at the moment, because the First Doctor is kind of revisiting old companions, so Dodo is kind of on the sidelines, which is a bit disappointing. But if you're one of those like me who want to hear more Dodo, then the Companion Chronicles Families is a must listen. This was a really strong box set. I think the first half is significantly stronger than the second half, but the White Ship and the Y Factor still have some really strong elements to them. But the Temple of Light and Stardust and Ashes really does reflect the more experimental and off-kilter aspect of 1960s Doctor Who that I absolutely adored. There really is something for everybody in this box set. Even the second half, the White Ship and the Y Factor, their explorations of historical events and historical characters are so effectively done in terms of just the historical elements that I can see people listening to this box set and these two are their favourite from the set. And there'd be absolutely nothing wrong with that. I think that the families connection, I think they're really skewing the definition there, but that's just semantics. This latest installment of the Companion Chronicles is another high point in a range that's already full of high points. This was really great. Great performances from all of the narrators. MVP Duncan Wisby for the first half, just playing an absolute treasure trove of different characters. And of course, we can't go wrong with more Stephen Noonan's First Doctor for the second half of the box set as well. Really great stuff. This did scratch the First Doctor itch for me. So anyway, what did you folks think of Doctor Who The Companion Chronicles Families? Let me know what your thoughts on the box set are in the comment section below. Subscribe for more Doctor Who Big Finish reviews. Hit the like button. It really helps me out. And folks, I'll see you all next time.